Okay, so I was just going to come on to a couple of little slugs that aren't very well known and aren't often recorded, but maybe a bit more common than we think if we start looking for them. But we'll find out. So these are slugs in the calmer group that eat fish eggs. So we have two species that we know of around UK coasts, and both of them occur in Cornwall, which is quite special. One of them feeds on the eggs of clingfish, which I'll come to in a minute, and this one feeds on the eggs of gobies. Now, according to the books, they only eat the eggs of the black goby, but I've found them on the shore several times, feeding happily on goby eggs, and I don't think I've ever seen a black goby on the shore, although some people might have done. So extremely unlikely to be black goby eggs. These are almost definitely either the common goby or the giant goby that we also get around Cornwall. I will see whether the video starts to play in a second, because I've got no way of telling whether it's working or not. I'll try again. That's going to go forward. Okay, yeah, we're in. That's it. Okay, so I spent ages looking for a calmer gobiufagga. It's not a very pretty name, is it? But I found these goby eggs. You can see all those little black dots are the eyes of the little gobies in their eggs on the rock. With the naked eye, I couldn't really see that sort of detail. I was taking this on my camera, so it's got quite a good macro. The slug itself would probably have been no more than a centimetre long, I would have thought. But you can see they've got lovely, really clear eyes on them. There's black eyes at the front. They've got very distinctive eyes, these slugs. The little white dots along its back are its spawn. They keep their spawn in their back and then release it when they decide the time's right. This one's quite close. What I found remarkable about this slug is those serrata along its back that look so much like the goby eggs that it's eating. And I spent about 10-15 minutes staring at this patch of goby eggs before I was convinced that there was a slug there. And it was only once I had my camera on it that I was absolutely sure, because those serrata on the back just look like all the other goby eggs around it. You see, like some of those little goby eggs are actually twisting around, and those little gobies are twisting in their eggs. They actually move, trying to get away from this monster that's come to eat their eggs. So they are pretty gruesome things, because they do feed on baby fish, but they're also fascinating. There've only been a few records of calmer gobiufagga around Cornwall. I think Dave Fenwick's found one or two, and I found a couple. So if you find any fish eggs on the shore, do take a really good look. Get your hand lens out, get your camera in there, and see if you can spot these, because it'll be interesting to see if we can get more records. But you can just see on the eggs there, they'd be quite hard to spot. And of course, that's in the water. If you've got fish eggs, you turned over rock and the fish eggs are on the back of the rock and it's out of the water, you've got no chance of seeing them, because that will just turn into a blob and they'll be completely indistinguishable. You need to sit and watch for a minute to see if any of those eggs seem to be moving before you can work it out. Okay, and this is the other species. It really does look quite different, although they've only been separated as two different species in the last few years, strangely. So the Calmer glaucoides, this one, it feeds on the eggs of clingfish, which is again kind of heartbreaking, because we all love clingfish, but these have lovely bluish long serrata. You can see they're always tipped with yellow. And again, those white circles on its back are its spawn that are ready to be laid. I've actually finished the bit on the sort of true sea slugs here. Yeah.
I'll ask a question before you move on, because at the end of the last presentation, sorry, you got rushed a bit. You were just telling us about the fact that some sea slugs will eat stinging animals like anemones or corals, and they'll actually package those stings, won't they, and utilise them. Can you explain that again? Because I think that's one of the most fascinating things, isn't it, with these guys?
Yeah, well, I can't say someone else on here may fully understand the biology of it, but the great grey sea slug, and I believe others in the same group, there are a few similar Aeolidia or Aeolidella sea slugs, and they feed on anemones, and sometimes you will find a great grey sea slug that has its head right into an anemone with half the anemone eaten, which is quite fascinating in itself, that they can eat these great big stinging animals as a little squidgy creature. But they then take, as they eat the anemone, they retain they call cnidosacs, the stinging part, the stinging cells, the nematocysts, if you like, but the cnidosacs, which are the bits that can contain these little harpoons, which can shoot out and inject toxins into their prey, which is how anemones trap prey. They shoot these little things out, stick in their harpoons and paralyze. I don't want to take over your talk for a few days' time, but but yeah, so the slugs, as they eat the anemones, can apparently retain those little stinging cells and keep them in the long serrata on their back. So if something comes along to try and eat them, as things brush against their serrata, they can receive these little harpoons into them as well.
Amazing, yeah, amazing. I mean, wonder how that evolved.
Yeah, it's a lot of these things, the photosynthesis and everything else. I've got no idea how it's come about, but clearly, being able to do that has given the animals an advantage that's increased over time. So yeah, classic evolution. So yeah, I've covered the sort of true sea slugs. There's like a couple of other animals I wanted to mention, and before we go to questions, because they may look like sea slugs, and I think a lot of questions I get is like, oh, is this a nudibranch? What have I found? So we've got things called the pulmonats. So pulmons means lungs. So they don't have gills. They don't have branchia like nudibranchs. They have lungs. Except they're not proper lungs either. They're very weird things. So we've got the Celtic sea slug, which is so distinctive, isn't it? A black lumpy thing. It always looks like an armored car or a little tank to me. It's just looks really, dark, and it's got these lovely little eyes on stalks that come out of its head, little black eyes. The Celtic sea slug is one of those animals that really is only found in the far southwest of the UK. Really just in Cornwall, I think, probably maybe up as far as Wembury and parts of Devon, but it's not very common outside of Cornwall because it has to live in quite warm places. And there's another little pulmonat that has a shell called Atina vata, which can live amongst barnacle tests and things like that on the shore. I don't have any photos of that. Someone else might be able to say more about that one. It's fairly common, but quite hard to see. Whereas the little Celtic sea slugs, because they're a few centimetres long, they're quite easy to find. So you find on those, go to like a north coast beach with those big rocks at the bottom of the bay that are covered in mussels and dog whelks and those sorts of things, and the big black rocks. And at low tide, you can find lots of these little creatures wandering about there. So there's Celtic sea slug. If you find one, you can normally find hundreds because that's what they like. They seem to sort of live in quite big colonies. There's one. You see the eyes on the front on that one. But yeah, they're beautiful, armoured back to them. The other thing I was going to mention that is, again, not a sea slug, and it's actually a gastropod snail, according to my books, is the Lamellaria. This is Lamellaria perspicua on this page. They look kind of like slugs. They're just little jelly blobs on the rock. My son's always called them Daleks because if you look at the top photo there, they've got that great conical protrusion that comes out of their head. And yeah, it just looks like a little exterminate sort of tube coming out the head. They vary enormously in colour. They vary a fair bit in size, but they're fairly small, probably sort of, thumbnail size normally. But every time I find one, I think, oh, I found a slug. It is a slug. It's a really exciting slug because it's just a blob on the rock. You expect it to be a slug. And it often takes me a few minutes to work out what I've actually got. I don't know why I've seen hundreds of these things, but they always baffle me because they vary so much in colour and appearance. But once they're in water, again, a bit like slugs, pop one in water, give it a bit of time. It's got a couple of little tentacles and it's got this big siphon on the front of its head, which is kind of distinctive. If you turn one upside down, I've got a photo there at the bottom of one upside down. It looks a bit more snaily than the slug. So it's got sort of hard rim to the edge of its body, and it does have a shell inside. It's got a fairly large shell inside the body, which I wouldn't advocate ever doing it personally unless you desperately, for some very important scientific reason, need to distinguish the species. But the only way I think to be absolutely sure of the species is to look at the shell. But generally the Lamellaria perspicua have quite a domed body. There's another little Lamellaria called Lamellaria latens, of which this one in the photo could be one. But like I say, I don't take them home and dissect them and take their shells out because it's not my thing. And I wouldn't advocate anyone unless they've got a really important scientific purpose removing anything from a beach. But the Lamellaria latens has a flatter body. It doesn't have such a dome to it, and it's normally a pale colour. And the Lamellaria perspicua often looks like it's sort of got flecks of sand and stuff on it. This one's a bit of a cleaner look to it. So I think that one was a Lamellaria latens. But like I say, it's impossible to be absolutely sure on the shore. You can record it as Lamellaria, but it's not a slug. It's a snail. It's got a shell, but inside. It's a fascinating thing. So I just wanted to very quickly say, if you are going to be going out on the shore when this is all over, if you're lucky enough to live near a beach and happen to have a look, somewhere that's safe to go, if you find sea slugs, that's brilliant, and I'm sure Matt will agree that what we need is records of sea slugs. We want to know what's out there, where it is, what it's feeding on, all sorts of information that can be used to help us to conserve the wildlife that we've got around our shore. My cuckoo's about to go off. And so if you want to put in a record, don't worry if you don't know what you found. You can take a photo that's as good as you can, get it in water, make sure that you've got all the features of it shown in your photos. Send them in. There's a link there through the online recording system, Orcs. Really easy to put your records in there. Find where you are on a map, stick it in. Make sure you know exactly where you found it, when you found it, and information like how deep it was. If you've got any other useful information on anything you found on the shore, put that in. Gender's on the list of stuff that it will ask for. It'll ask, is it a male or a female? And the thing I haven't said about these slugs yet is they're both. They're all both. They are male and female all at once. They're hermaphrodites. They are able to lay eggs. All of them are able to lay eggs. All of them are able to produce sperm. They're fabulous multi-gendered things. Okay, so with sea slugs, that question on the form is irrelevant. You don't need to fill that in. Equally, if you find sea slug eggs on the shore, even if you haven't found the actual sea slug itself, you can put in the record of the eggs that you found. In some cases, it will be possible to say definitely, if it's pink spaghetti, that's definitely going to be a sea hare of some sort, probably the common one. Okay, so submit whatever information you've got. Lovely photo there of Diaphodoris alba, which I'm insanely jealous of, Matt, because I've never seen one. I've called it the reverse fried egg slug because that's what it looks like to me. I'm not quite sure what its common name is. Do you want to say anything about that slug, Matt?
Well, I was with Sally Sharrock at the time, who's a really experienced sea searcher, and she sort of I think has seen loads of them. So perhaps it isn't as rare as you feel, but some of the divers in the audience might be able to say if they've seen it. But yeah, that was out off the manacles, and I was just very lucky that it caught my eye because it was very small. That's less than a centimetre. Yeah, beautiful,
right.
Yeah, beautiful little creature.
Yeah, so I think on photos you can never tell how small these things are, can you? Sort of, they see these amazing photos of sea slugs. Oh, I'd spot that on the shore, and actually they're tiny and very often living on something that looks rather like them. So it would be quite hard to spot them. But that's an awesome find. Yeah, a lot of these things, it's like the karma slugs, the ones that eat fish eggs. When I've actually gone out to specifically look for them, I've found them quite a few times. So maybe they are there and they're more common than we think, but it depends whether people are actively looking at them. Anyone who was involved in looking for stalked jellyfish when we were trying to get the Marine Conservation Zone dedications will know that up until the point that they were put on the list, pretty much no one had ever seen a stalked jellyfish, and then suddenly we're all going out looking for them, and now we see hundreds of them, and it's probably not the case that there are more there. It's just what you're looking for. So all the records are really useful. I've got a little list there in case anyone is particularly interested in scribbling anything down, and this will be on YouTube as well, so you can pause it on there and take a look. Will this be on YouTube, Matt?
Yes, this is going straight up there.
Hi, YouTube. Yeah. So there's all sorts of websites out there that can be really, really useful for identifying sea slugs and recording them. Look out for Facebook groups as well, because there's Northeast Atlantic nudibranches and groups like that, which are really brilliant. And the sea search identifications page on Facebook as well is brilliant. Send your photos into that, and you have a whole load of really keen people like me and Matt and others who can't wait to see what you found and put a name to it for you. Some great books out there as well. I've put a list of books on there that might be useful. I've snuck mine in there as well, because as you can imagine, my book has a whole chapter on sea slugs, and then I've snuck sea slugs into lots of other chapters too. But yes, Steve Trell and Julie Hatcher brought out a book last year, a photographic guide, which is really useful, particularly if you're just starting out and you're not very sure about what you're finding on the shore. Have actually photos rather than black and white line drawings and long keys. Obviously, if you are more scientifically minded, things like the Hayward and Ryland is sort of classic seashore identification book with lots of line drawings and keys. I've got there's this book, which is really great as well, Linnaean Society book of benthic opisthoranx, and that's a really good one. Lots of keys as well, which can be helpful if you're trying to identify these things. But these days, I think some of the Facebook groups are just brilliant for identifying everything.
Yeah, please use Shore Search Cornwall and Sea Search Cornwall if you're Cornish, because we want to. It's nice to get locals to see the pictures, and we try and figure it out locally. And if we can't, then we send it further up country, don't we? That's generally the approach. So yeah, excellent.
Yep. Brilliant. And equally, if anybody wants to contact me directly, I've got my Cornish Rock Pools website. There's a contact me button on there, and anything you send through that comes to my email. And once I've checked you're a real person, you can send me photos and things through that. So,
well, Heather, that's been absolutely brilliant. Thank you very much. It's been fascinating. A load of questions have been flooding in, which is great. And I'm sure that there'll be more questions. So we'll make a little start on them, if that's all right with you, Heather.
Yeah, that's brilliant.
I'm going to try and do them in chronological order. So we've already asked that one. Vicky Tolland says she's only ever found a sea hare and a sea lemon down in Polseth. So can we go rock pooling with her and try and find them with her? And yes, definitely, I'll definitely be going, Vicky, in October. We've got Shore Search Week, and as you know, we always come to Polseth, and I'll do my best to look for sea squirts. Maybe we'll try and get Heather to come along on that if she doesn't.
Yeah, and Vicky, come on a field trip to Looe anytime as well. I'm in Looe, and we've got some great shores around here as well. We get quite a lot of people from other groups around Cornwall come over to Looe to join our events as well, and so we can share our favourite beaches.
Now, I've got a brilliant question here from Tim. He says, does anything prey on sea squirts? Not sea squirts, sea slugs.
Yes, they do. I don't think there's many things that sort of exclusively prey on sea slugs, but yeah, I think quite a few of them would be taken by fish, crabs, and things.
And presumably that might be why they bother using these stinging cells, because
exactly. There must be some things that do try to eat them because they've bothered to have all sorts of defences. I think a lot of them rely on camouflage and the fact they really are quite small and unappetising. They're not perhaps the most tasty thing in the sea. But yeah, although I don't necessarily have a lot of evidence as to what eats them, I don't think there's been a lot of creatures filmed feeding on sea slugs in the wild that I've ever seen.
They're arguably less they're like really fascinating, aren't they? Brilliant, but they're arguably less as an important part of the food web. As some other species. Someone's asked here, are they generally thriving, reducing in number, or even some of them becoming extinct? That's from Leslie.
Okay, that's a really good question. I think we can only know that by really good monitoring. It's complicated is always the answer. I think sea slugs do well when there is a good supply of their food source and the waters and currents are suitable for them. So obviously anything that we can do to look after the biodiversity of our shores and shallow seas, which is where they mostly tend to be, is going to be beneficial to them. I think some species will tend to be really numerous, and it's easy to sort of notice if they have a big boom or bust. I think if we had a summer where there weren't any sea hares, we would really notice it, because they're big and obvious and easy to record. And normally we have hundreds of them, don't we, when all the seaweed grows up, because they're vegetarian, they all come in on the seaweeds as they grow, and the beach can be full of them. I think if we had a summer or two where we were not seeing many or any, that would ring some alarm bells. For some of the other species, I think because we see so few of them anyway, it's only people who are doing really quite serious low shore rock pooling or divers who would see them. It's not necessarily very easy to be absolutely sure what the numbers are doing, or whether it's of any concern, because these animals will obviously, like any other, have booms and busts in population as well. I think the best thing that we can do really is to keep good records of biodiversity. It's understanding that, do we have a good diverse population of bryozoans and sponges and sea squirts, are the things that are a bit bigger and don't move, that we can see more easily. If there's anything that threatens those, then by definition it would threaten the sea slugs. So I think that's where
it's why in the Sea Search project we're really focusing in on the whole the habitat and the biotopes that we're coming across, rather than individual species, because they will vary and you might miss seeing certain species, and the records we're getting are quite ad hoc for things like some obscure small sea squirts. So it makes it harder to conclude whether their populations are doing well. So anyway, that's a good question. So here's a diver called Tim. He says he can understand how you use a camera when you're diving, but how, Heather, do you use yours in a rock pool? Question mark.
Okay. I'm not sure I'm allowed to plug any particular brand names on this or that, but we're right. Because but these days there's a new sort of generation over the last few years of small, compact, pretty simple fire and shoot sort of little cameras, which are waterproof to maybe 10 meters or so, and shockproof. And for someone like me who is really good at destroying kits, they are absolute magic. A lot of us use the Olympus Tough cameras, but there are others available on the market. So you need to try out, see what's out there if you're going to get something. But the Olympus ones I found have got a really good macro on them, and as I've said already, a lot of these things will fit on a little fingernail. So if you're going to get in close and get a photo, you need something that's got a really quite decent macro to pick it up. The other really good thing about them on the shore compared to diving is, on the shore I find I'm often working in really reduced spaces. I'm working under overhangs, in little inlets in the rock, and even when I used to have, in the old days, I'd have like a little compact camera that had a housing over it, like you take a housing over dive cameras, and that added so much bulk to the camera that very often I couldn't actually get close enough physically to the animal as it was tucked away under the rocks to take decent photos. Whereas this one is sort of more or less sort of hand size, and I find it fits into gaps that other cameras can't reach.
We've actually just asked Tom De Geer to make a little film with some tips on rock pool photography using TG cameras, because so many of the marine groups in Cornwall are now investing in them. They're brilliant. So yeah, that's great. Thank you, Tim. Good question. So, this is a really good question. Owing to the fact that some of them have got these stinging cells in their serrata, are all sea slugs safe to touch, or can some sting you? That was Fran posed that question.
Okay, I've never heard of anyone having an issue with being stung by any of our sea slugs. You can only imagine, like, Australia must have some that can kill you, because Australia's always got stuff that can kill you, doesn't it? But and there is a sea slug, isn't there, that lives on Portuguese Manawara, or the Pacific equivalent of it, which goodness knows what that one's like. I wouldn't, probably shouldn't go near that. But in all honesty, the anemones in this country that those animals are eating will not pack very, very strong stings anyway. So most anemones, I mean, you know, obviously be careful, wash your hands afterwards if you do it, but most of us at some point will have touched an anemone if you've been on the shore. They feel kind of sticky, and those are all those little stinging cells firing into your skin. But it feels sticky and it doesn't do anything unless you have a particular sensitivity. Then you're unlikely to have any problem. The only time with anemones is like if you touch your eyes afterwards, you could potentially get a sting. But I think with the sea slugs, I've never heard of anyone having an issue with it. Probably they don't have such powerful stings as the snake locks anemones they've been eating. They'd have some in their serrata, but not on the scale that the anemones do that use them to feed. So I imagine not. But when you're touching anything, it's always good. Wash your hands in good warm water and soap afterwards. Yeah, just be careful. Be much more careful with the Bethella plumula, that yellow one with the gill on its side and the shell inside it. That one, if you pick up a rock and you happen to hold the rock where there's a Bethella underneath, you can't always see when you lift up a rock where you put your hands, you like come out with a velvet swimming crab on your finger. If you happen to lift up somewhere that's got a Bethella plumula on it, it will squirt sulfuric acid onto your hand. I think that is far more likely to cause you a problem. I did once after rock pooling years ago, like a few hours later, have like sort of bubbling skin on one of my hands, and I've always wondered if that was a Bethella plumula, if I just somehow accidentally touched it or annoyed it, or you know, if you pick a slug off the rock, you know, if it doesn't like it, you could get squirted with sulfuric acid. Only that species, I think, in this country. Most of the others are fairly benign, but yeah, that's the one I'd watch out for.
Just different subject, but you know, you were saying about the Portuguese man of war that gets preyed on by a sea slug. There's one that eats Bellella, isn't there, as well? And it looks just like it swims freely out in the pelagic.
Yeah, I think that's the same one.
Yeah, beautiful creatures. Right, so we've got another question here. Is there a particular area on the coast where they do not occur? Why would that be? And someone also said, is there a sea slug season? Those are both good questions, quite similar. Yeah. Okay,
yeah, I think the areas you might not find them, estuaries where you've got big changes in salinity during the day, so difference in salt level, and also areas that are like sort of big long sandy beaches where there's basically nothing for the sea slugs to eat. You might not find any there. There are some sea slugs that actually, lots really, really tiny ones that live in the sediment, or in kelp holdfasts and things, which, you know, you might not see them, but they might be there. But most of the ones I've talked about today, you would tend to find on a rocky shore, one that's got, you know, reasonable sort of variety of habitats, that's got, you know, seaweeds, bryozoans, sea squirts, sponges, those sorts of things. So you can imagine if you're around, I don't know, Brighton or somewhere, a shingle beach, you may not find so many sea slugs easily there as you find here, although they might still be present under the water.
When we're diving, we always notice loads more sea slugs when there's lots of hydroids around, and the hydroids tend to do brilliantly in the spring, don't they? But by the sort of end of the summer, they've all been eaten by sea slugs. So
yeah, and most of sea slugs are seasonal, aren't they? There's particular times of year that you'll tend to find the spawn. So like things like the sea lemons spawn really quite early, and you can find those really sort of, you know, spring onwards. You tend to see quite a lot of them. You can find sea slugs all through the year, but particularly that sort of those summer months when they're all coming into spawn, there are probably more of them on the shore than there would be other times, and they're more visible because they're laying their spawn, which draws attention to them. Yeah. Excellent. Right, let's keep. I'm going to go down the list here again. Lots of people saying they love their Olympus cameras. I do as well. I've still got an Olympus TG2. I've been using a TG2, but it did die eventually. Will you find most of them on the lower shore, or can you find them on the upper shore as well? Okay, you'd find the most variety, almost as with anything really, find the most variety on the lower shore. There are a couple that you can find a fair way up the shore, like the sea lemons. They are anywhere that's got sponge, so any sort of dark overhangs that have got sponges on from quite a long way up the shore. Some of the others you might find sort of mid-shore as well. The Celtic sea slug that isn't a sea slug but breathes air, that can be sort of mid-shore downwards, because they need to breathe air. They take themselves into little pockets in the rock when the tide comes in, and then come out again and feed outside of those times. So yeah, there are a few things. The Rostrangaruba as well, that little bright orange thing. You can sometimes find that around the midshore. If there's sponges around that it can eat, it'll be around.
So I think that's most of the questions actually. If anyone else has any more, you've got a couple of moments just to text us them. But I think that's been absolutely brilliant, and certainly I've learned loads, Heather, from you today, but also over the years out rock pooling. If anyone hasn't been rock pooling with Heather, I highly recommend it. You'll be amazed at what she finds. Oh, someone said, is it when they're diving they don't seem to see many? My tip for that is get some. Get them. I've just started needing these things in the last couple of years, and I stopped seeing sea slugs as well. So I'm hoping, if I get contact lenses for diving, I'm hoping I'm going to start seeing sea slugs again. There's some people who just see sea slugs everywhere, and Heather's one of those people. They're quite rare people. I think it takes a while, doesn't it, for you to get your eye in?
Yeah, it's getting your eye in. It's also kind of knowing where to look and what you're looking for, because I like the sort of third or fourth slide I showed of just a blob on the rock on a background that's the same colour as the blob. They're not always as obvious. They look such beautiful colours in the photos, and they are, but those colours can be really well camouflaged, like the Phaseolina auriculata, that red, white and blue one. It's like, oh, spot that anywhere. But actually when they're on sort of seaweeds and bryozoans and sponges that are all different colours, all reds and oranges and blues, and they're a lot less visible than you think. So look for the spawn coil. Look for the spawn coils, and look for the things that they eat. So look among hydroids, or look among bryozoans and sea squirts.
I've picked up a number of sea squirts over the years by photographing the hydroids, and then found them as an accidental bycatch afterwards, and that's always a happy accident, isn't it?
Yeah.
And also a lot of Paula and her team up in Coastwise, they've been doing a lot of work with microscopy, and if you get a bit of hydroid or some sea squirts under a microscope, quite often you will then find tiny sea slugs, and the whole world opens up, doesn't it, if you've got a microscope?
Yeah, absolutely. If you're able to take a very small sample of something, look at it under a microscope. Hydroids are brilliant. The other thing that are really good at, like, kelp holdfasts, that they have all sorts of things living in there, and particularly sea slugs quite often in there. And there are some species that are only normally found when people take sort of dredges of sediment and things and bring those back and look at them. They find all sorts of species that are out. They're all out there somewhere. So
keep at it, everybody, and let's hope we get loads more exciting records of sea slugs.
Shout out to Coastwise. They're doing an amazing job up there in North Devon. If anyone watching is close enough to get to any of their events, their microscopy stuff, I would love to go along to that. Go and look at plankton, go and look at sea slugs. Awesome.
Brilliant. Well, thank you, Heather. That's been absolutely brilliant. I'm sure everyone in the audience